Okay, so I'm coming, although I'm from the United States originally, now I've been living in New Zealand about 18 years. Okay. Do you know about The Hobbit? Lord of the Rings? Yes? Okay. That's all very popular now, from New Zealand. And I teach it, I'm at Massey University for the last 3 or 4 years. And before that I was in Wellington at Victoria University. Okay. This subject area, cross-cultural knowledge management. These are both, cross-cultural and knowledge management are both very big interests of mine for a long time. And I'll talk a little bit about both of them. Now you guys are really management information systems people, right? Okay. At my first university, we are a school of information management. A very big school, maybe the biggest, I think almost one of the biggest in the world. We have about 30 staff just in the School of Information Management. But now at Massey University, we are a very small business information system. And we are in the School of Management. So I am back and forth between information system and management. So that's what I'm doing now. And I will go over these areas quite slowly. How many of you are familiar with knowledge management? Have any of you heard of that? No? Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that. So actually knowledge management grows from information management. Right? So it's information management and then knowledge management. Okay, so today we're going to talk about knowledge management and culture, and then we're going to put them together and come up with cross-cultural knowledge management. I will try and bring in technology and information systems because that's your interest. So let's go. If you have questions, you raise your hand. So first I need to talk about knowledge management, KM. Okay? And you'll see, okay, although there's a lot of writing here. You have the slides, right? Okay, maybe you looked at it. You know Peter Drucker? Have you heard of Peter Drucker? Okay, in the mid-90s, he's a very famous management guru. And in the mid-1990s, he said, the only competitive advantage companies have is their knowledge. Okay? The only competitive advantage companies have is their knowledge. So after he said that, and also some other things, people said, maybe we need to manage our knowledge. If we can manage our knowledge, maybe our company will be more competitive. So then kind of the field of knowledge management begins, right? And knowledge management is really about helping an organization adapt and survive when the environment is changing. Now, if I had a blackboard, I would be drawing pictures. Okay. We'll come back to this idea. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I will just put it over there. Cool. Okay, I'll come back to it. The world is changing very, very quickly, right? And the way to deal with that change is through knowledge of the way the world is changing. Okay, so if you can manage that, then your organization can survive. That's the idea. And I'll come back to this later. Okay, so knowledge management concerns many things in the organization. It concerns information, because the way to get good knowledge is to have good information. So information systems are critical in knowledge management. Okay? So there is technology. Okay? But what we want to do in knowledge management is we want to combine information processing and storage and the way people use information. Because actually, most of the knowledge in an organization is in people's heads. Okay? And they really need information to help them to think better. Okay? If you have good information, then you have better knowledge. But the knowledge is really in your head. Okay. So this is, I'm just giving you a brief history of KM. So KM comes from organizational management, the field of organizational management. Okay, and I told you about Drucker, the importance of information and knowledge as an organizational research. KM also comes from information technology and information systems. And I'm a little cynical here. You know, yes? Okay, I'm a little, good question. You know, skeptical? I'm a little, I'll tell you in a minute, but let's say in the 1980s and early 90s, information systems, IS, is very successful. And all the companies are selling information systems into other organizations, trying to make money. Right? And then Drucker says something like this about knowledge, and then suddenly, all the companies that are selling information systems are now selling knowledge management systems. Okay? So, I think they're the same system. I think they just rebranded and repackaged and could sell things again. So that's why I'm a little cynical or skeptical. But in fact, information technology is quite important in knowledge management. Okay? But as a tool. Okay, and then also KM comes from psychology. And we don't have to go too much detail. And of course, library and information science. Library and information science has been managing the world's information and knowledge for thousands of years. So they have something to say about that. Cognitive science, the way people think, that's a part of knowledge management. Economics, about the financial payoffs of having knowledge and using it correctly. Social sciences as well. And I think I'll stop. Anyone have questions about this? So the point here actually is that knowledge management comes from many, many different kinds of disciplines. Okay? It's not just knowledge management from the last 100 years. It's really from the 1990s. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so history of knowledge management. About in the 1980s, people start talking about it a little bit. Just a little bit. Then in the 1990s, we start seeing quite a bit more of it. Key things. You know the big consulting companies? Like Taiwan used to have Pete Marwick Mitchell, Ernst & Young. The big accounting companies, the big consulting companies. Okay? What do management consulting companies sell? What is their business? What do management consulting companies sell? If your company has a problem, you call a management consulting company. They come in, they look at your problem. What are they selling you?
Money.
Huh?
Money.
Yeah, they're selling you their knowledge, their solutions, based on their knowledge. Right? So consulting companies, many of them hire PhDs. They're very educated people. And they're selling knowledge. So these companies said, you know what? We sell knowledge. How can we manage our own knowledge better? So they developed many in-house knowledge management programs, just for themselves. And some of the companies looked at information technology. Some of the companies looked at HR, human resource solutions. They all had their own solution, personal solution. And then what happened is, they said, we developed these programs for our own company. We can actually sell them to other companies. So that's one reason knowledge management became popular. These companies develop it for their own company, then they start selling it. And then this book by Nonaka and Takeuchi, The Knowledge Creating Company, was a very big book in the mid-1990s that really focused people's attention on knowledge management. Quite an interesting book. And then again, World Bank, OECD, some of these big global organizations have to understand where is our knowledge? Where are the people who know things? Some of the people are in Africa, some of them are in Asia, some of them are in Europe. How do we bring these people together? How do we bring their knowledge together? So these big organizations were looking at managing knowledge. Okay, and then in the 2000s until now, KM just becomes quite an established field in organizations and in government, public sector. Maybe in the late 90s there's maybe 1 or 2 journals in knowledge management. Now there are dozens. Okay, so it's just become a more and more popular field. I have been teaching knowledge management since about 2001 at the master's level. Okay, we started at Victoria University a Masters of Information Systems, Masters of Information Systems for people who are post-experience. So they are 30 and 40 years old. To get into the program, they needed at least 5 years of working experience. Okay? And in that program, that master's program, knowledge management was a core course for 10 years. So we decided that was a very important part of the program. So, and I taught that core course for about 10 years. Okay, very simply, okay, real simplification. There are basically 2 ways to look at KM approaches. This is already old, but it's still about right. One is the management of information, which you guys might be more interested in. And in management of information, you see knowledge as an object. Knowledge is something out here, and I can put it in an information system, and somebody somewhere else can call it up, and they can use it. Okay? So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of management of people. Knowledge is about how we talk to each other, about how we exchange ideas, about how we create new things. Okay, that's kind of management of people. Which one is easier to implement? Which of these ways do you think is, if you are a CEO and you went to a presentation on knowledge management, you said, my company needs knowledge management. Which system, which way are you going to go? This one? This one? This one? Okay, anyone think this one? Okay. This is the way they went. Why? Easier. The cost is more or less fixed. You can probably measure this system better than you can measure this system. Okay, and that's the way people and managers think. Okay? We put in a fancy information system. We call it knowledge management. Every time somebody Googles and looks up in our information management, we got a hit, we can measure that. This is very hard to measure. Who's talking to who? How many ideas did you have? Very hard to measure. But in fact, I argue this is the way to go. But this is the easy way to go. So, all through the 2000s, actually it's quite interesting. Those CEOs, they go to the knowledge management seminar, they come back, they say, let's do a knowledge management system. They do it, they spend a lot of money, nothing changes. So by about 2005, 2006, people are starting to say knowledge management, not really good, not really, it's a fad, it's passing, okay? Because they didn't really try knowledge management, they tried information management for something that wasn't quite right. There are a lot of issues. These are the same issues still for 10 years, same kinds of issues. But we don't have to spend too much time. But this one, on the slides that I changed, I added something here. Getting people on side. Getting people to support the KM system, the KM process. That's kind of difficult, and that's kind of important. That's kind of what we were talking about before. If you introduce a new system, how do you get people to join in with it? And I'm going to call that culture. I'm going to call that organization.